No Place Like Oz, Chapter 9. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em were still huffing and puffing from the climb up the hill when we finally approached the entrance to the Corncob mansion. It was even bigger up close than it had looked from far away, and I felt almost nervous as I reached for the corncob knocker on the door. What if he was different? What if he didn't remember me? What if he was old and gray? Could scarecrows get old? There was still so much about Oz that I didn't know. There wasn't much time to wonder anything. The door opened before I could knock, and there he was, right before my eyes, just exactly the same as I'd left him, just the same as I'd remembered him every day since Glinda had sent me home. "Dorothy!" the Scarecrow exclaimed. I threw myself into his straw arms, and he swept me up and spun me around, whooping with elation. "The Munchkins sent a bluebird to tell me you were on your way, but I was afraid to believe it." "You know I'd never leave you for good," I said, laughing. He was still grinning from ear to ear when he set me back down again, but the Scarecrow's face looked more serious. "We missed you, Dorothy," he said, his kind smile, drawn-on eyes, ones I'd never forgotten, began to fill with tears. "Oz hasn't been the same without you. I didn't think you were ever coming back." "I didn't either," I said, reaching out to touch his arm. "But I'm back because of Glinda. I know she's in trouble, and I have to rescue her. Do you know where she is?" The Scarecrow cocked his stuffed head to his side. "Glinda?" he asked. "What have you heard about her?" "I saw her," I said. He looked even more surprised at that. "She was at my old house by the Munchkin village." "Well, it wasn't her exactly. It was more like some kind of vision, like she was trying to send me a message. She told me she needed my help." The Scarecrow looked concerned. He was stroking his chin in thought. I knew that if anyone would know what to do, it was him. He was the wisest creature in all of Oz, and probably anywhere else too. "We have much to talk about," he said after a spell. "But first, introduce me to your friends." I laughed. I'd been so excited to see him, I'd forgotten all about my aunt and uncle. They were still standing at the doorway, looking like they absolutely had no idea what they'd gotten themselves into. "They're not my friends, silly. They're my family. My Aunt Em and Uncle Henry." As I said their names, Uncle Henry gave a funny little half-wave, and Aunt Em bowed awkwardly. The Scarecrow lit up. It's amazing how expressive a painted face can be. He clapped his gloved hands together and he bounded for them, practically tackling them as he wrapped his spindly arms around their waist. "Of course, I've heard so much about both of you. How have your travels been to Oz so far?" Aunt Em, Uncle Henry, and I all exchanged a glance. "Oh, it was all just grand until we came to the screaming monster trees that tried to murder us," Uncle Henry said. "Oh dear," the Scarecrow said. "The Forest of Fear? Don't tell me the Munchkins didn't warn you." "How could we not pass through the forest?" I asked. "There was no way around it, at least as far as I could tell." "Of course you have to pass through it, but the Munchkins didn't really tell you to stuff your ears with pixie thread?" I shook my head. "I didn't even know what a pixie thread is." "It keeps you from hearing the infernal racket the trees love to make. If you can't hear them, you won't be afraid. And if you're not afraid, they won't even know you're there. Won't bother you a bit. They'll just look a little exceedingly ugly, like exceedingly ugly trees, which, in the end, is really all they are." They sensed fear. Was that how I managed to get rid of them? Just by showing them that I wasn't scared? No. Aunt Em and Uncle Henry and Toto had all been frightened. Somehow, I made the trees afraid of me. The problem was that it wasn't just the trees who had been scared of me. I'd scared myself too. "I don't think we'll be traveling back that way any time soon if we can avoid it," I said, "with or without pixie thread." The Scarecrow sighed. A reasonable response. Those trees are such a nuisance. Bad for tourism, especially when the Munchkins can be so forgetful about reminding passers through to protect themselves. I keep telling the princess that she should just set a match to the whole forest, but she won't hear it. She says they're part of Oz, that destroying them would upset the whole magical balance. "If that's balance," Aunt Em said, shuddering at the memory of the afternoon, "I'd hate to think what it looks like when the scales start to tilt." The Scarecrow tipped his hat to her. "A very good question, Mrs. Gale," he said. "Let's hope you never find out that answer. Now come, let's eat. You must be starving after what you've been through." He turned to a doorway that led deeper into the castle and cupped his hands to his mouth. "Munchkins, prepare a feast for our special guests." As we entered a great dining room, two Munchkins dressed in yellow and green, with tiny pointy hats perched atop their bald heads, appeared out of nowhere. We took our seats at the banquet table. Even Toto had been given a place next to me, and before we knew it, our table settings flew in front of us, only to land gently at our places. The napkins folded perfectly, the forks on the left, none of it even a smidgen askew. Within seconds, our glasses were filled to the top with a delicious-looking beverage I didn't recognize, and it was only 5 minutes before tray after heaping tray of piping hot food appeared on the table. I took the liberty of having food prepared that I thought you'd be familiar with, rather than some of Oz's more exotic native dishes, the Scarecrow said, much to the relief of my aunt and uncle, who, despite their experience with the self-buttering corn, still seemed apprehensive at the idea of eating magical food. And very kind it was of you. There's enough grub here to feed my old army platoon, Uncle Henry said. He picked up a serving spoon and helped himself to a generous portion of mashed potatoes. It sure does look good, I think, Aunt Em said, eyeing a heaping bowl of caviar, which, even though it wasn't the least bit magical, was probably just as exotic as anything else Oz had to offer as far as she was concerned. At least Uncle Henry had gotten the chance to see a few scattered corners of the world back in his army days. This was the first time Aunt Em had ever set foot outside of Kansas. She was taking her maiden voyage in remarkable stride. I'd never eaten so much in my life, and I'm pretty sure Uncle Henry and Aunt Em hadn't either. Yet somehow we managed to finish each course just as another, even larger one came. I guess a day of traveling will make a girl hungry. "Aren't you going to have any food, Mr. Scarecrow?" Aunt Em asked, around the time they brought out the stuffed goose. "Oh," the Scarecrow said, waving her question aside, "I don't eat. The wizard may have given me an exponential set of brains, but I'm still shy a working stomach. Now, Dorothy, tell me about what brought you here. I've been dying to know." I wasn't sure how much to tell him just yet. I'm not sure why, but I didn't want Em and Henry know about the shoes, though they had to have an inkling. "Well," I said, smiling brightly, "I made a wish, and before you know it, you were all here." "Is that so?" the Scarecrow said thoughtfully. I could tell he wasn't buying it. "We landed right in the same spot as last time. My old house was still there, if you can even imagine." "Of course it is," he replied with a smile. "That little house is considered one of Oz's most important landmarks." Uncle Henry looked up from his Waldorf salad. "Mr. Scarecrow," he said, "Dorothy tells us you're the smartest character in all the land." The Scarecrow nodded modestly, and Uncle Henry continued, "My wife Emily and I were hoping you'd have some idea of how the three of us might be able to get back—" "Oh, drop it already," I snapped. A.M. gasped, and I instantly clapped my hand over my mouth. I have to say that I was shocked at myself. Never in my life had I spoken so disrespectfully to my uncle, or to anyone, really. Had it been such a long day that my aunt and uncle were being so troublesome? Here they were, eating the greatest meal they'd ever dared to dream of, and all I had to think of was how to get back to our sad little farmhouse and our dusty pig pens. I must try to control my temper. I chilled myself. If I wanted my aunt and uncle to see things my way, it wouldn't do to make them angry. The Scarecrow shot me a curious sidelong glance, but otherwise ignored my outburst. "It's true that I've been blessed with an access of the finest brains known to man, or beast, munchkin, witch, or wizard," he said, tapping his head with a stuffed glove. "But I'm sad to say that traveling between Oz and the outside world is no simple feat." "I see," Henry said. "Dorothy thinks a lady by the name of Glinda might be able to help," Aunt Em said. "Do you have any idea where we might find her?" Again, the Scarecrow gave me a meaningful look that said, "We'll discuss this later." "I do not," he said. "Glinda's whereabouts have been unknown for quite some time now." "For how long?" I asked, putting my fork down, suddenly interested again in the conversation. "Oh, it's hard to say," the Scarecrow replied. He fiddled with a piece of straw that was poking out of his hand. "You know, we're not much for the time here in Oz. No one gets older here, and we celebrate the holidays wherever we're in the mood for it. But it was some time after Ozma took the crown. Glinda let it be known that she had important magical business beyond the Deadly Desert, and that we shouldn't worry about her, that she would return when the time was right. That must have been, at least 10 years ago, if I venture a guess." "10 years!" I exclaimed. "How long have I been gone?" The Scarecrow turned in his seat and fixed his eyes on me seriously. "I don't know. But I dare say there are many people here in Oz who won't remember you at all. I myself had almost forgotten what you looked like. My last adventure here had lasted for what felt like almost a month, but when I returned home, only a few days had passed. Still, the idea that I had been gone so long that I'd been forgotten was unimaginable. All my memories were still fresh in my head. I had so much to ask the Scarecrow. Why wasn't he king anymore? Who was this Ozma person? Did he have any suspicions about where Glinda had really gone? But I had the impression that he didn't want to talk about any of it in front of my aunt and uncle, so I finished my meal in silence. But there was so much in my mind that I hardly touched my food. Uncle Henry was a different story. I hadn't even made a dent in my Waldorf salad, and he had already scarfed down a goblet full of maraschino cherries, a small mincemeat pie, several hunks of lamb slathered with green meat jelly, and, despite the fact that I was unsure where exactly shellfish came from in Oz, where there were no oceans that I knew of, a giant portion of shrimp cocktail served in a crystal goblet brimming with crushed ice. And then they brought out the ice cream. "Oh dear," Aunt Em said when she saw it. "I'm afraid I can't possibly eat any more. The meal was just perfect, Mr. Scarecrow, but I'm afraid it's been quite a day. Would it be terribly rude of me to excuse myself?" "Of course not," the Scarecrow said. He clapped his hands, and another Munchkin, this one dressed in all yellow, appeared. "This is Bon Bon. He'll show you to your rooms." "Thank you, sir," Uncle Henry said, standing along with them. "Dorothy, don't you stay up too late. Tomorrow we'll need to be up at the crack of dawn to find Miss Glinda so that we can head on home." Bon Bon bowed and led them away. As soon as they were gone, I pulled Toto onto my lap and turned my chair to face the Scarecrow. "Now tell me what is going on here," I said. "I know there must be more than the story that you're telling me." He sighed. "You first," he said. "I don't for a moment believe that you wished your way here. It doesn't work that way." So I told him the story, of my terrible birthday party, of the shoes, and the note that had come with them. "They must have come from Glinda," I finished. "Who else could have sent them?" "It certainly sounds like her doing," the Scarecrow mused. "But until now, I believed that Glinda was dead, or gone for good." "No," I said, so emphatically that it came out as something approaching a shout. "No! Someone's done something to her. She's still in Oz, and she's in trouble. That's why she brought me here, to save her." "You may be right," he said. "We'll go see Ozma tomorrow. She needs to be appraised of the situation." Every time anyone said the name Ozma, a terrible feeling came over me. I'd never met her, and I barely know who she was. But I didn't like the sound of her. "Who is this Ozma?" I finally was able to ask. "And why aren't you the king anymore?" A look of something like regret passed across the Scarecrow's face. He glanced down at his plate. "Ozma is Oz's true monarch," he said. "She is a direct descendant of Oz's founder, the fairy Lorraine. She was just a baby when the wizard rose to power, and able to inherit the throne. Still, the wizard worried about the power she would eventually be able to yield. It's hard to seize control of the kingdom when you have the true princess swaying about in her prime, so he sent her to the north, to Gillikin country, what happened to her there is a mystery. Only a few people are privy to all the details, and I am not one of them. What I do know is she eventually managed to grow up and made her way back to the Emerald City to reclaim her crown. Unfortunately for me, that was just a few months after I had been made king. I succeeded the crown to her, immediately, of course." He sighed and shrugged. "It was nice while it lasted." It sounded like a bunch of hooey to me. "So this Ozma can just march in and kick you right on your rear end? That's not fair." "I had no choice. It is the way of Oz that Lorraine's heir should rule. The people were happy with me as their king, but I must admit that Ozma had been a good ruler too. The kingdom had never been more peaceful or more prosperous." He sounded cheerful, but it was obvious he was putting on a brave face. I scowled. "I don't care," I said, outraged by the injustice. "You would have been better. You deserved that crown. What did she do to earn it, except show up when it was convenient for her?" "Oh, it's not so bad," he said with a wave of his hand. "I like it here in Miss My Corncobs. There's plenty of time to think here, and Ozma made me one of her top advisors. She always calls me into the palace when she needs someone with real brains." "What about the Tin Woodman? What'd she do with him? Send him off to be sold for scrap?" The Scarecrow chuckled. Now, Dorothy, there's no need for that. The Tin Woodman is still where you last saw him. He still lives in the Wicked Witch's old castle, if you can still believe it. He spruced it up quite nicely. It's nothing like it was before." "And the lion?" "Still ruling over the beast, just as ever. He lives deep in the Forbidden Forest in Gillikin country." The Scarecrow sighed. He's becoming a bit of a recluse, though. The three of us haven't been in the same room since I left the castle. It broke my heart to think about that. Glinda's missing, the Scarecrow disposed, my friends scattered across Oz. I had expected to come back to Oz, find it just as I left it, but nothing was the same. Now let's take a look at those shoes of yours, he said after Bon Bon had served me an after-dinner root beer float. I stood, extending my foot proudly, and the Scarecrow studied the mysterious shoes. Have you tried removing them? He asked after examining them for a bit. Why, no, I said, surprised that it hadn't even occurred to me. But as hard as I tugged on the heels, they wouldn't so much as budge. Just as I suspected, he mused. How strange, I said. How will I bathe? The Scarecrow chuckled. I'm sure you'll find a way. At any rate, they're magical. That much is evident. And they seem to have fused themselves to you. The red is certainly Glinda's signature, but she... It has to have been Glinda, I said. I've never been so certain of anything, especially after she appeared to me and asked for help earlier today. We have to help her. We'll get to the bottom of it, he said. Tomorrow we will travel to the palace. Ozma will have heard of your arrival and will be expecting you. She's very interested in you, you know. The princess is an avid student of history, and she's always been fascinated by your story. I'm not sure if I care to see her, I sniffed. She doesn't sound very pleasant, in my opinion. The truth was that I didn't trust the sound of her. Was it just coincidence that Glinda had disappeared just after this new princess had sieged the palace? The Scarecrow brushed aside my protests. Oh, she's nothing if not pleasant. I think you two will be great friends. She's about your age, after all. But... I hesitated. Not sure whether to voice my concerns, but then decided if I couldn't trust the Scarecrow, my oldest friend, all was lost anyway. What if Ozma's the one who did something to Glinda? I was of half a mind that the Scarecrow would dismiss the notion as ridiculous, but he didn't. The princess is very powerful, he said, lowering his voice. She is very shrewd, but she's also very lonely and in need of companionship. I urge you, go to the palace and befriend her. She will never be defeated by force. But I've always found force to be overrated anyway. If Ozma knows anything about Glinda's whereabouts, you will be the one who can learn about it. Become close with her. Give her no reason to doubt your intentions. I nodded. I understood. I didn't like it, but I understood. At that, the Scarecrow summoned Bon Bon, who appeared out of nowhere as if he squeezed himself out of a gap in the floorboards. Follow me to your quarters, Miss Gale, he said, extending a gentlemanly hand. One more thing, the Scarecrow said as I swooped a now dozing Toto in my arms. For now, I think it's better that you don't tell the princess that you've seen Glinda at all. Okay, I nodded. And Dorothy? Don't mention the shoes.